It's time to huddle up, football fans, and welcome into the Hard Count Podcast. It's the inaugural episode, in fact, of the Hard Count Podcast. I am your host, Anthony Galler, and thank you for joining me today. And welcome into this new podcast / YouTube channel, whatever you really want to call it. But welcome into the Hard Count Podcast. Very excited to get this started. Very excited to talk about the great sport of football, my favorite sport. And this is going to be the NFL podcast where I'm going to discuss one topic for each down in football. So if you know your football, you know that's 4 downs, 4 topics. That's what we're going to be starting here today. So thank you again for joining me. It means a lot. Love all the support that I've already gotten, and I haven't even launched a video yet. So thank you very much for joining me. And we're going to get right to it without wasting any more time. 4 downs, 4 topics. Here we go from all of the latest news going on in the NFL. So we're going to start with this. Andy Dalton, the former quarterback of the Cincinnati Bengals, you call him the Red Rifle, he's going to the Dallas Cowboys now on a 1-year deal for $3 million. Could reach as much as $7 million with incentives included in that, but he will be taking his talents from Cincinnati to Dallas to be the backup quarterback for Dak Prescott. Now, Dalton has been with the Cincinnati Bengals for 9 seasons, since 2011, when Cincinnati took him in the 2nd round coming out of TCU. And during his tenure as a Bengal, Andy Dalton, 204 touchdown passes, too many interceptions, 118 of them. But really the big problem for Dalton throughout his Cincinnati tenure has been the fact that he's failed to advance far into the playoffs. He hasn't appeared in any AFC championship games, certainly hasn't appeared in the Super Bowl as of yet. So after 9 seasons of Dalton being in Cincinnati, team really not advancing where they want to go. They, of course, as you all know by now, they elected to take Joe Burrow out of LSU with the number 1 pick in the draft this year. So Andy Dalton now becomes expendable. Didn't need him to be a backup for Burrow after he's been there for 9 years. So he's now on his way to Dallas. He's going to be the backup quarterback for Dak Prescott. And I think this is a wonderful move for Dallas, because it doesn't change anything for the Dallas Cowboys. Dak's still that guy. Dak's still going to be the guy who pretty soon here, it's somewhat surprising that it hasn't gotten done already, but pretty soon here, Dak's going to be the guy who's going to be making $35 million, maybe more. We'll see. I know those negotiations are obviously still going on, but Dak's still going to be your guy. But Andy Dalton immediately comes in, and he is a tremendous upgrade at the backup quarterback position. Because before bringing in Andy Dalton, you're talking about a team in Dallas that has Cooper Rush as their current backup quarterback before this signing. Cooper Rush, a guy who's barely seen the field throughout his career, his very brief career so far in the NFL. So you needed a guy who, look, Dak Prescott, I got to give him credit. He's been very durable throughout his career so far, albeit only a few seasons, but he's been very durable so far for Dallas. And so the concern is not so much that you think Dak is going to get hurt, but you never truly know. And so you bring in Andy Dalton, he immediately becomes one of the best backup quarterbacks in the NFL. Now, I know Jameis Winston, he also just recently came off the market going to the New Orleans Saints, but Andy Dalton, look, this is a quarterback who, despite the fact that he hasn't advanced very far in the playoffs, despite the fact that he's thrown a lot of interceptions in his career as a Bengal, this is a guy who I really see Andy Dalton as being, a low-tier starting quarterback in the league. He's certainly not a top 10 quarterback. He's certainly not in the top 15, but he is a lower-tier starter in my book. And I think the reason why he's not being given a starting gig as of right now is because of the fact that the NFL quarterback position currently is just so talented. There's so many good quarterbacks in the NFL right now, a lot of really good young quarterbacks as well. And honestly, if you look around the league, 32 teams, I'd venture to say that probably as many as 27 or 28 teams out of 32 really feel comfortable with who their quarterback is right now. Either they've got a young guy who's very promising, they're looking at him and thinking that he's going to be the future. Maybe you look at a guy like a Daniel Jones or a Sam Darnold, Josh Allen, obviously. I think Cleveland with Baker, they're still going to go with Baker for now. So I think you've got so many teams, or you've got a veteran guy. Obviously, the Bucs just made a move for Tom Brady. You've got a Drew Brees, you've got an Aaron Rodgers, whatever. But there's just so many good quarterbacks, and I think that's why Andy Dalton is not able to get a starting job right now. So he goes to Dallas. He's going to be the backup. Good deal for him. He's going to get $3 million. He's worth more than that, but to just be a backup, he's going to get $3 million. Could be as much as $7 million. Again, with some of those incentives built into the contract. But this is a big move for Dallas. It's not a flashy move because, again, it's a backup quarterback, and nobody's really going to get too excited off of just a backup quarterback who might never play this season, depending on what happens with Dak. And, of course, we hope that Dak stays healthy, and Dallas does as well. But if a situation does arise where Dak is not able to play a game or a few games, Andy Dalton is a guy who can come in and look. This is a guy, again, when Andy Dalton has had weapons throughout his career, he's had A.J. Green for many years, when prime A.J. Green. You look at Dallas right now, and the issues with Dallas, they might have other problems, and we can discuss those, on a different show. But in terms of weaponry and in terms of what they have on offense, there's really, at the skill positions, there's really no concern for Dallas. You've got Amari Cooper, who's one of the top 12, maybe 15 receivers in the NFL. You've got Michael Gallup, who's one of the most intriguing, he'll be in his third year. He's one of the most intriguing young receivers in the NFL. You also bring in CeeDee Lamb now out of Oklahoma with the number 17 pick. So, and that's not even mentioning Ezekiel Elliott in the backfield for him. So you've got all of the weaponry to make Dak successful this season. And if something happens with Dak where Andy Dalton needs to come in, maybe he needs to play a half, maybe it's a quarter, or maybe it's a game, maybe it's a few games. But if something happens where Andy Dalton has to come in, that Andy Dalton's a guy who, when he has sufficient weapons around him, which Dallas certainly has, that Andy Dalton's a capable quarterback. And, honestly, when you think about the guys who Dallas has right now, whether it's Zeke, Amari, Gallup, CeeDee Lamb, as I mentioned, coming into the mix this year, when you look at the guys who Dallas is going to have, is the drop-off between Dak and Andy Dalton, when you have those pieces in place, is the drop-off between those guys really that significant? I don't know that it is. I think Dak's a better quarterback. I'll be honest about that. I think he's a better quarterback. But really, is the gap between those two guys, when you have all of the weaponry around him that Dallas is going to have, is the gap between those two guys that significant? I don't really think that it is. So this is a very smart move for Dallas. Andy Dalton is a lot better than Cooper Rush. We don't really know what Cooper Rush is. He's barely played since coming into the league. And you just can't have, we've seen in recent years, we've seen the significance and the importance of the backup quarterback. Guys get hurt. It's a violent game, and you need to be able to have a quality backup who can come in and win you games if your starter has to go down. That's exactly what New Orleans did last year. New Orleans went 5-0 with Teddy Bridgewater, in relief of Drew Brees when Drew Brees went out with a thumb injury. So this is exactly what you need in the NFL today. You need a quality backup who can fill in if the situation calls for it. So I think it was a marvelous move for Dallas. It's not going to be the shiniest or flashiest move of the offseason, but it's very smart, and Dallas is doing the right thing here because you needed a guy who was better than Cooper Rush. So now we're going to move on to second down. And so I talked about, of course, Andy Dalton, talked about Jameis Winston going to the Saints. So we have one big quarterback name, if you're not counting Joe Flacco, which at this point I'm just not counting Joe Flacco anymore. But we've got one really big quarterback name still on the market. Most of the free agents have been scooped up. Jadeveon Clowney's still out there, but really most of the big name free agents have been scooped up. But there is one big name, one notable name left on the quarterback side of things, and that's Cam Newton. Cam Newton, he spent all these years in Carolina. He's a former MVP, took Carolina to the Super Bowl in 2015. Obviously, Carolina did not play well that game. They got pushed around by Denver. Cam Newton really got pushed around, did not have an MVP performance or anything close to it that year, but he is a former MVP. He played in 2 games last season for Carolina. before, of course, the foot injury that kept him out for the remainder of the year. Carolina, initially with Kyle Allen at the helm, did okay. Actually won a few games early in the year with Kyle Allen, but down the stretch did not go well for Carolina, as we know. Ended up finishing last in the division, collapsed, and really was a forgettable season for Carolina, forgettable season for Cam Newton. Now, at the end of the year, going back about a month and a half ago or so, Carolina was looking to potentially trade Cam Newton, see if they could find a trade partner for Cam. That did not end up happening, so they ended up releasing him. So Cam's been a free agent now for a little bit, has yet to be signed. Of course, Andy Dalton just came off the board. James Winston came off the board. All of the other notable quarterback names really have come off the board, except for, again, if you want to count Joe Flacco, sure, but I don't. So you've got Cam Newton, the former MVP, still out there. And for me, I'm not terribly shocked by it. I think a lot of people are, but I think for me, it's just the injury concern. Of course, you've got Cam Newton. He's not a guy who's particularly young now. He's getting into his 30s. So you know that even a healthy guy, even a healthy quarterback, once you hit that 30 mark and start to progress after that into your 30s and into your mid-30s, there is going to be a steady decline happening. It's not going to be, for a healthy quarterback, it's not going to be falling off a cliff, but that there is going to be a little bit of decline after you turn 30 and from that point on. So when you look at Cam Newton, he is not the definition of a healthy quarterback. He's been banged up several times throughout his career. He's missed a lot of games because of it. So when you look at Cam Newton, he's extremely talented when he's healthy, but you just don't know when that's going to be. And it's very hard to predict when that's going to be, because you think a guy's coming back and you think he's going to be healthy. You think he's going to come back off his latest injury and be okay. But we know that sometimes that is just not the case. So with Cam Newton, it's very tricky because the talent is there. Now, it's been a handful of years since that Super Bowl season. It's been 5 years since that Super Bowl appearance. So, you're not getting necessarily, in terms of just pure talent, you're not necessarily getting the same exact Cam Newton that you got that season. And then you add that in with the injury history, the injury concerns, and now you're talking about a guy who, he's a backup quarterback. Again, and I feel the same way about Cam Newton as of today that I feel about Andy Dalton. I think Cam Newton could be a starter in this league still. Even with all the injuries factored in, I still think Cam Newton is good enough to be a starter in the NFL today. But I think it's very tricky because of the fact, again, the quality of quarterback play out there right now. There's so many young guys who teams are looking at. Even a guy, think about a guy in Washington. Look, that's where Ron Rivera is right now, his former coach, Cam's former coach. You look at Washington right now, I know that Dwayne Haskins really didn't excite too many people last season. I know that he did not play great. Now, a lot of that is the fact that Washington doesn't really have great weapons right now. Yeah, they had, one receiver, a rookie, but they didn't really have a lot to build around Dwayne Haskins last season. So I think Washington looks at, Rivera looks at Haskins and says, I got to see what you got this year. I got to give this a little bit more time, before I bail on you, because we just don't know what you could be in a little bit of a better situation this year. So there's so many teams around the league who kind of have that similar mindset with their young quarterbacks. Or on the flip side of that, you've got, again, those veteran quarterbacks, that I mentioned, whether it be Tampa going out and getting Tom Brady, whether it be Drew Brees in New Orleans, Russell Wilson in Seattle. So the market for Cam Newton is just not as robust as some people may think that it is. For a former MVP, especially, you might think that it's a very robust market for Cam Newton, but it's just simply not because of the quality of quarterback play in the league right now. So, I think that's one point with Cam Newton. The other point is that we know that Cam Newton is such a big personality. We know that he's a superstar. He's a rock star. He's a superstar. He is one of the most popular, not saying the best, but he is one of the most popular quarterbacks in the league still, even though, he hasn't had that MVP season in a handful of years. He's still one of the most popular quarterbacks in this league right now. And so if you're bringing in Cam Newton to be a backup for your team, is bringing in like the superstar, rock star type of backup, is that really the best plan? Or do you want just a boring guy like Andy Dalton? He's a boring guy. He's not very exciting. There's no highlight plays with Andy Dalton the way that there is with Cam Newton. And he's just an average. He's a good backup quarterback. He's a talented backup quarterback. But in terms of just his personality, his persona, everything about him, he's just like an average guy. So do you really want to take that chance if you're a team? Maybe I shouldn't say a chance, but do you really want to just have the superstar, rock star quarterback as your backup? As your starter is one thing, but do you want to have that as your backup? And do you want to be answering questions all season long about, Cam, he's a former MVP. He's one of the biggest stars in the NFL. How is this guy not your starter? Do you think that Cam could be the starter down the road if things go awry for the guy who is the starter right now? You don't want to be answering those questions all season long. And so I get that. And so that's part of the reason why I think that the market for Cam is just not as robust as many people may think that it is. So I think Cam, look, I think that there's some interesting destinations for Cam. The one I keep hearing floated around is Pittsburgh. I think that's compelling because I think that Big Ben, even though he's an older quarterback, even though he has an injury history too, I think that Big Ben, there's nobody that's going to say, because of, how long Big Ben has been in Pittsburgh. And Pittsburgh's a loyal franchise too. It really is. There's nobody that's going to say, well, Big Ben, his job might be in jeopardy if you bring Cam Newton in. That's not the case. It'll be Ben's job. I don't know. It's an interesting thought. I don't know if Cam really fits in there. I think that both Cam and Big Ben have some big personalities and can be a little combative sometimes. It doesn't mean that they're bad, horrible people. But there is some drama associated with both. I think that's fair to say. So I don't know if that fit really makes sense or not. I think Jacksonville's another one that's been floated around. Washington has too, but Ron Rivera, he's been very wishy-washy about bringing Cam in. Hasn't been very committed to Cam. I think he wants to go with Haskins, and I don't blame him. Jacksonville is interesting. I think Jacksonville, look, Cam would be an immediate, humongous upgrade to Gardner Minshew over there in Jacksonville. But the situation with Jacksonville is that I think they're tanking, and I don't think they're really even trying to hide it much at this point. They're trying to trade off a lot of people. I think that they're all in on Trevor Lawrence, hopefully, for next year's draft when he's available out of Clemson. So I don't really know where Cam fits in the scheme of the NFL right now. Just looking at the backup quarterback situations, I think Jacksonville makes a ton of sense, but they don't seem to want him because they're tanking. New England makes sense, but I don't think that Cam is a quarterback that Bill Belichick is really interested in. And they might be, New England, look, they could be thinking to themselves as well, let's give Stidham a year. And if it doesn't work out, we could be looking for another quarterback too. So I don't really know where Cam fits in. And I'm not sure that Cam's going to be getting a call and a job very soon here. I think that he will eventually. Somebody's going to get hurt. There's going to be some situation that arises where Cam's going to be brought back in. He could be a backup or he could be a starter. It doesn't matter. He's certainly talented enough to be a starter. So we're just going to have to wait and see on that. But I do think that the market for Cam is just not as robust as people are going to lead you to believe, just because, again, of what I've already talked about, how there's really not that many openings. A lot of young quarterbacks who teams are excited about, and a lot of veterans who teams are sticking with. So we're going to see what happens with Cam Newton, but I don't know that it's going to be an immediate home for him anytime soon. So now we'll get to third down. I mentioned the Jacksonville Jaguars about a minute ago, so I'll keep going with them. The Jacksonville Jaguars have decided, earlier this week, just a couple of days ago, was the deadline for the 2017 first-round picks, if teams were going to pick up their fifth-year options or not. A lot of results that were not too surprising. Mitch Trubisky did not get his option picked up. Corey Davis from Tennessee, John Ross, those were some of the guys in the top 10 who did not get their options picked up. But perhaps the best player who did not get their option picked up was Leonard Fournette of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Fournette actually had a really good season last year. He was 7th in the NFL in rushing yards, had a total of 1,115 rushing yards. He also caught a career-high 76 passes. Now, the issue for Fournette last year, a couple of years ago, he couldn't stay healthy. He was dinged up virtually the whole year, barely played. Last year, he actually stayed healthy, played in all but one game. The only game he didn't play was the final week of the season when Jacksonville was obviously already done, already out of it. But the issue for Fournette was not the rushing yards, was not the fact that he was catching passes out of the backfield, because he was doing that very well. The issue was only 3 touchdowns on the year last year. Now, I think a big part of that equation is, of course, Jacksonville does not have a great offensive line. I think that when you look at Gardner Minshew, Gardner Minshew was the starter for the majority of the year after Nick Foles very quickly got hurt. So when you look at Gardner Minshew, that's not a guy who, if you're a defense, you're really respecting as a quarterback who can beat you over the top. So you can kind of stack the box against the Jaguars. Jacksonville does not have a great offensive line. So I think that's a big reason why it was a bit of a struggle for Leonard Fournette in terms of the touchdown department. And you have to consider this too. Jacksonville is trailing in most of their games this season. They only won a few games. I think they win, 4-12 or 5-11. So they only won a few games. So Jacksonville is trailing most of the time. And of course, the more you trail, if you're a running back, the less opportunity to score touchdowns. That's just how football works, generally speaking. So I think that Leonard Fournette, this is a guy with an injury history. 2 seasons ago, as I mentioned, he missed a good chunk of the year. This past season, he was healthy, but that injury concern is still there. But when you look at Jacksonville, this is clearly a team in a full tank, a full rebuild mode. I don't know if they're going to use the word tank. I know a lot of teams are scared to use tank. They just don't like using that word. But this is a team clearly in a full tear it down and then hopefully rebuild it back up mode. They're trying to get Trevor Lawrence for next year. I don't think they're hiding it very much. That doesn't mean they're going to publicly announce it to the rest of the world, but internally, you can pretty much figure out that this is what they're trying to do. They're trying to get Trevor Lawrence for next year. So a lot of guys are potentially out of their way out of Jacksonville. A lot of guys have already, left. A lot of guys have already been traded. They traded Calais Campbell to the Ravens earlier in the offseason. Yannick Ngakoue, I think that they're waiting for the right offer for him, but he's going to be out of there soon. If you've seen his activity on Twitter and him calling off a team, he clearly doesn't want to be there. Right now he's technically on the franchise tag for this season, but he'll be out of there soon, I think, as soon as Jacksonville gets the right offer. But Leonard Fournette, Leonard Fournette's very interesting because most of the time when you look at these 5th-year option guys, most of the time it's players that are not very good who are getting their options declined. And that makes sense. Obviously, if the player was good, you'd want to pick up their option. Now, that's not always true because sometimes a player's option gets declined just because it's a little too much money for what the production has been so far. They're not necessarily a bad player, but you just don't want to commit that amount of money to them for what the production that they've given so far. But there are some players, again, this 5th-year option can be applied to any of the players in the first round of the draft. So there are some players that just simply have not lived up to expectations in any way, shape, or form. But Leonard Fournette's a good player. Maybe he shouldn't have been the 4th overall pick. That's completely fair to say. Would not argue with you on that. And I think Jacksonville, if you ask them privately if they could do it all over again, I don't think that they would want to take Leonard Fournette with the 4th pick overall again either. But he's been a productive player in his career. He's a good running back. He's a top half of the league running back. I'm not saying that he's in the same class as a Christian McCaffrey. I'm not saying he's in the same class as a Ezekiel Elliott, a Saquon Barkley, even a guy like a Nick Chubb. But Leonard Fournette's a good player, and I think he's the best player whose option was declined when you look at all of these guys who have their options declined. Now, the question for Jacksonville really is, are you going to be able to find a home for him outside of Jacksonville? Because I think Leonard Fournette, in due time, he's going to be on his way out too. I don't think there's any sense if you're Jacksonville, if you're a rebuilding team, if you're going for Trevor Lawrence for next year's draft, there's no real sense in keeping Leonard Fournette around in the long term, the long haul. He is a running back. Running backs, unless your name is Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley maybe, running backs largely are replaceable. So the question is for Jacksonville, are you going to be able to find a home for this guy? Are you going to be able to find a trade partner? There's been a lot of teams who I think going back a couple of weeks or so were rumored to be in the mix. Maybe you think about Detroit. They could have been in the mix because they're not really sold on Kerryon Johnson, I think, for the long term. But they addressed that need, or seemingly addressed that need, in the draft with DeAndre Swift. You look at the Colts. I think the Colts were another team who were rumored to be in the mix. Marlon Mack. How committed to Marlon Mack were the Colts, but they went out in the draft and they got Jonathan Taylor from Wisconsin. You think about the Buccaneers, Ronald Jones, not a great running back. So, would Tampa Bay be interested potentially in Leonard Fournette? Well, they went out in the draft. They got a guy from Vanderbilt, Keyshawn Vaughn. So are there teams out there who are really interested in Leonard Fournette? He's been on the trade block. Jacksonville, they first dangled his name in trade discussions probably about 2 weeks ago. And, these things take time. I understand that. But is there really, it's sort of like the Cam Newton situation, is there really a robust market for Leonard Fournette? Just because of the fact, I think it's a number of different reasons. A, he's a running back, and running backs 95% of the time are replaceable. He has an injury history. So, is the market for Leonard Fournette really, really hot right now? Or is it more lukewarm? And I think that's a big question mark, because Jacksonville, I think, they're not going to be asking for, I don't think at least, a first rounder for Leonard Fournette, but I think that they would like to move off of him. There's just no sense in really keeping him around for a rebuilding team. You want to start new. You want to start fresh. If you're going to trade Calais Campbell, if you're going to, we think, trade Yannick Ngakoue pretty soon here, they got rid of AJ Boye also earlier in the offseason. So if you're going to get rid of all these guys, you're going to let all these guys go. Obviously, they were able to trade Nick Foles, too, get rid of his contract. So that was a big move for Jacksonville. But if you're going to get rid of all these guys, you might as well go all the way and just continue with Leonard Fournette as well. So I don't think the issue is, does Jacksonville want to trade Fournette? And the issue isn't, is Leonard Fournette a good player? We know that he's a good player. He was 7th in the NFL in rushing yards last season, despite the fact that Jacksonville does not have a good offensive line, and despite the fact that with Gardner Minshew at quarterback, that's not really a quarterback that you're going to respect if you're a defense. So that's not the issue. The issue is just, will there be a trade partner for Fournette in the coming weeks or the coming months? I don't know that there's going to be. And again, because I think a lot of the teams who are rumored to be in the mix, whether it be Detroit, whether it be Tampa, I think Miami, you could look at Miami. I didn't mention Miami yet, but you look at Miami, they, before the draft, they had Jordan Howard, but that was really it. Well, they went out and they traded, I think it was a 5th round pick for Matt Breida. I don't love Matt Breida. I don't love Jordan Howard. I don't love either of those guys. But, at that point, when you brought in Howard through free agency, when you brought in Breida through a trade, do you also need to go out and then trade for Leonard Fournette? Probably not. So a lot of the openings for teams that might need running backs have been closed. So I don't really know what the market is going to be for Fournette in the coming weeks or months. I don't think that he's going to have a very big market. And so while Fournette is a very talented player, and he certainly is, I don't think Jacksonville is going to be able to trade him very easily. All right, and finally, 4th down. It's gone really fast so far. But we're now at 4th down, the final down of this first inaugural episode. And that's a big one because it's something that's going to be happening in just a couple of days, actually, because the NFL is going to release its preseason and regular season. Not that anybody cares about the preseason, but if you do, they'll be releasing that as well. But they're going to be releasing the regular season schedule this coming Thursday, set for 8 o'clock Eastern Time. This coming a little bit later than most years. Normally the schedule release happens before the draft, sometime in April, sometime first, second week of April. It is a little bit later this year. They pushed it back just because of everything going on. They pushed it back later than the draft now. So we have the schedule release coming this Thursday, and I'm really excited about this. I think the schedule release for me, this is one of my favorite things that happens in the NFL offseason. Certainly doesn't beat the actual games, but in terms of off-season events for the NFL, I think you have to put the draft number 1. But I always get very excited about the NFL schedule release. And the reason why is because the NFL schedule release is so much more meaningful than other sports. When you look at baseball, for example, normally, again, in a normal year where this is all, we're talking about normal years here, normally 162 game schedule, and you play your division opponent 18, 19 times, I think it is. How many times do I need to see the Cubs and the Pirates? How many times do I need to see the White Sox and the Indians, whatever? So you play your division opponents so many times. It's a 162 game marathon of a season. They call it a marathon for a reason. Even the NBA, you look at the NBA, even that is 82 games. But with the NFL, it's just so unique because it's only 16 games. And not only that, but the schedules rotate and fluctuate so much from year to year. Now, of course, you play your divisional opponents twice a year, so that makes up 6 games of the schedule. But the other 10 games just fluctuate and rotate so much from year to year. You rotate the out-of-conference division that you play. So if you're the New York Jets, the AFC East this year is playing the NFC West. Well, next year the AFC East will be playing the South or whatever, and then they'll be playing the North. So that rotates from year to year. And then you also have the interconference opponents in terms of the divisions within the AFC or the divisions within the NFC. Those rotate as well. So again, the AFC East this year is playing, I believe it's the West. Could be wrong about that. It might be the West. But again, nonetheless, doesn't matter. It's just going to rotate, and it rotates every year. And so it makes the schedule very fun because it's going to be very different from year to year. And not only that, but I think that the timing of your games in the NFL schedule, just the layout of your schedule, is so much more crucial because, again, it's 16 games. And when you look at baseball, 162 game schedule, or when you look at the NBA and it's an 82 game schedule, the layout and the structure of when you're playing who does not really matter as much. It's not really as significant. But with the NFL, it is. Because, if you start your season, first 2 weeks, if you have to go to, let's say you have to go to New Orleans, you have to go to the Superdome, and then you have to go to Philadelphia maybe the week after. You start the first 2 games of your schedule at New Orleans, at Philadelphia, you could very easily dig yourself an 0-2 hole right out of the gate. And then, when you start 0-2, look at the statistics. I mean, 0-2 might not sound like that big a deal when you have 14 more games to go. But when you look at the statistics, if you start 0-2, your chances of making the playoffs drop drastically. 0-3, you can almost forget about it. But I just think that the layout of the NFL schedule is so fascinating because it's when you play certain teams. It's, do you get those breaks in your schedule? When is your bye? In baseball and basketball and hockey, you don't have a bye week, or, you have a day off, but then you get right to it the very next day. With the NFL, you only play once a week, as we know, and you get a bye week. So where's that bye week going to be factored in? Do you get, I think that's very meaningful. Do you get a week 4 or week 5 bye? Do you get a bye closer to the middle of your schedule? Do you get a bye, week 11, week 12 towards the end? So it's just very interesting to see how the construction of the schedule all plays out. And so that's why I think that the release of the schedule is so fun with football in comparison to other sports. Now, a lot of people were kind of up in arms about this, saying, you can't release the schedule, with everything going on, you can't release the schedule. Why not? It's a schedule. It's a schedule. There's no games being played. Nobody's in pads right now. Nobody's hitting each other. It's a schedule. Release the schedule. In the NFL already has contingency plans in place. We've got about 5 months until the season starts in September, or at least, what it's scheduled to start right now in September. But the NFL has contingency plans in place already. So release the schedule as it is right now. If they need to make adjustments to it, they certainly will. They're going to push back potentially the start of the regular season, maybe to October. They might push back the Super Bowl date a little bit. And if they need to do that, they need to do that. But in terms of releasing the schedule, I don't see any reason why they can't just release a schedule and just let you know this is what it's going to be, hopefully. So I'm very excited for that. That's going to be this Thursday at 8 o'clock. And the next time I do a show, I'll have some thoughts and reactions to some of the more interesting schedules and some of the more interesting matchups that I think are most notable from those schedules. So that's coming this Thursday at 8 o'clock. And yeah, that's going to do it for me today, actually, on the Hard Count on the Hard Count podcast. Got through all 4 downs today. Again, thank you very much for joining me on this inaugural episode of the Hard Count podcast. I'm going to be back sometime next week. And again, I'll be discussing all of the key notable matchups, all of the key notable schedule layouts from when the NFL releases the schedule this Thursday at 8 o'clock. So thank you very much. Appreciate all the support. I'm going to see you next time from the gridiron. It'll be the Hard Count Podcast, episode 2. So thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day. Take it easy.